Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 28th of August 2023. Let's get straight to, let's get straight to the front line. I just want to add to my previous video because it's just coming out now that there's a big fire in Moscow. Normally would be part of my, Russia on fire, part of my hits and losses. Building on fire, 1,000 square meters apparently. I don't know if this has anything to do with drone activity over Russia at all, but just thought I would throw that in there. Krasnohorsk near Moscow. There's a big fire. Anyway, let's go to the front line. We're going to concentrate mainly on the Robotna sector. There's a little bit of advancing. I believe this is my map from yesterday, so don't take the pins seriously. But there might be some advance for the Ukrainians around the Andriivka area near Bakhmut. The Russians continue to fight to hold the strategically important village of Klishchivka. They are introducing reserves in the area by all accounts, or at least by that account. Mainly it's going to be about Robotna. In Velika Novosilka, the Ukrainians appear to be still sort of refitting, ready to go again there. There is reports today, as I mentioned, in Uruzhany of the use of incendiary munitions and cluster munitions by the Russians in their defensive stance there. It's all about Robotna, really, where the Russians are under the Kosh between Novopokropivka and Verbove, that the Ukrainians are possibly breaking through in the Verbove area, as well as putting pressure south of Robotna. We have operations towards Kopane and also Novopokrovka further to the northeast. So that is, what we're talking about. Those places get mentioned. Right, let's have a look. We'll go on to, there's a really good analysis by Emil Kestel-Helmi talking about this whole area. I'm going to go through that if I get a chance during my Frontline update. Talks about sort of trench networks, but the kind of conclusion to all of this is that actually it's quite variable. So he says main points of the thread: fortifications are not as strong in all areas of the first main defensive line as known as the Surovikin line. So that kind of the idea of weaknesses will play into the Ukrainians being able to exploit certain areas of the defensive lines. And he says also the Russian preparedness varies as well. So not only are the trenches better built in certain places, but they're also better manned and the Russians are better prepared in certain areas. So there will be opportunity for the Ukrainians to exploit those weaknesses and hit in certain areas. It's not going to be equally difficult all along the front line. He then says positive developments for Ukraine are possible in the near future, especially local successes. Taking into account obviously the terrain itself, and reporting from Ukraine did a video on this just last night, so check that out. In this area, talking about using the terrain or understanding the terrain in the area and how that affects where they are attacking. As you can see here, you've got the main defensive lines coming down here. You've got Novopokropivka, you've got Verbove. The Russian defensive lines follow the trenches along here. The claims are that they have been breached. Whether that is the tank trenches rather than the human trenches, I guess remains to be seen. The defense ministry, the Ukrainian defense ministry, has formally stated that they have liberated Robotna. So to go back to this map, you've got Robotna up here and the front line south of Robotna on the way to Novopokropivka. And there were some claims, Syriac maps and others saying that they were still fighting in Robotna, that the Russians had done counterattacks and were in the middle of Robotna, and it all just seems to be fairly much fictional as far as I could work out, and that fighting is south of Robotna and on to Novopokropivka. Right, so that is that. Trent Telenko here saying, good to Astray Intel claiming the battle for Novoprokopivka has officially begun. The boys at the front are undertaking a colossal task of strategic importance, and while I certainly don't expect a swift battle, this would not be the first time the Ukrainian army has surprised me. So obviously hoping for a swift battle, but that's the claim that is about Novoprokopivka at the moment. After the liberation of Robotna, the flanks in the Verbovy area are dangerously wide open for the Russians. And this is, again, I think something reporting from Ukraine said that actually the wider that this salient becomes, the more stretched the Russian defenses will be in terms of manning all of those trenches. You know, you've got quite a lot of trench lines. Don't forget, you've got in between these lines of defense, you have other smaller trench lines, dugouts in the tree lines. Every tree line will be defended in some way, but that means you've got a lot of defenders needed to defend all that area. And as it becomes, you know, that area of intense fighting becomes kind of wider as they're pushing towards Kopani as well as Novopokrovka, the Russians will need to have, you know, solid defenses all along there to stop there being, you know, these areas of weakness that Emil was talking about with regards to Russian preparedness and variability in fortifications. So we will see, you know, what will happen over the next 2 days. Obviously, it's going to be really interesting to watch out this for this sector. But he goes on to say, in addition, the 12 kilometers between the two villages will be extremely difficult for Russia to defend, since the reinforcements will have to move under Ukrainian supervision and artillery, which makes a large transfer of reserves practically impossible. Some will be destroyed along the way. Again, I think reported from Ukraine was talking about that, how talking about the number of trucks that they have spotted of Russian reinforcements means that many people have been taken out there. So the claim is that actually the Russians have lost an awful lot of troops in defending this sector. Obviously, the Ukrainians are going to be losing troops and equipment as well. It's whether that ratio is in their favor. Okay, breaking news says Visegrad 24, pinch of salt and all that. Ukrainian troops are getting closer to liberating Verbove after having broken through Russian defensive lines in front of the settlement. So this is the claim. We go back to this map, that here, Verbove, you can see these trench lines running along the higher ground as it gets higher towards this hill where I was talking about between Novoprokopivka and Verbove. The Ukrainians were trying to attack. There were claims that they might have broken through there. There are claims that they've broken through at Verbove as well, or either that. It's just, you know, fog of war. They might not have broken through at all, of course. So, you know, be careful with what we take from these sources. But the claim here is that the Ukrainians have broken through. It appears. I mean, if these red lines can be taken seriously, both lines, the tank trenches and the manned trenches. Okay, another claim here from Osint Uri. Update for Robotna area. No confirmation from the Ukrainian General Staff that Russian mill bloggers are reporting that the Ukrainians have broken through to Verbove. If true, this is the 46th Air Mobile Brigade and is huge in many ways, especially combined with the Ukrainian report that the 82nd Air Assault Brigade have also moved on Novoprokopivka. This means that the main lines of the Russian defense in the sector have been breached. Quote, a colleague of Ossetians reports that a DRG deep reconnaissance group has broken into Verbove, says Belarusian Silovik. Now, there are claims that Ossetians, that I think I've seen some footage of trenches that Ossetians were in, that they had, these are people from South Ossetia, part of Georgia, if I remember correctly, that one of these kind of annexed areas and whatnot, that there were paraphernalia of the Ossetians in the trench. So they've certainly, you know, the Ossetians have lost some positions somewhere. Breakthrough, another quote from someone with the call sign Ossetin. Breakthrough of the Ukrainians in Verbove, in the Polohy district, destroy them brothers. So there are claims from both, it appears, Russians and Ukrainians. I can't be certain that that's a Russian source because Belarusians obviously fight on both sides. But yeah, there are claims that the Ukrainians have broken through. We shall see. Uh, Confirmation from a Russian source: Ukrainians are advancing between Novopokrovka and Verbove. So again, this is, let's go back to the map. Claims of breaking through at Verbove, claims of advances in the middle at this height, and also advances on Novopokrovka there. Confirmation from a Russian source that the Ukrainians are advancing between Novopokrovka and Verbove and taking the key heights that will open the doors to the Sea of Azov. So, in the meantime, this says a Russian source, while they are trying to distract us with tales about the fact that the once most promising politician and living Crest has already cheerfully passed Robotna and entered the first line of defense lines of General uh, Zelyanikin. Not sure what all that means. They calmly walk through the fields between Novopokrovka and Verbova. What does that mean? That's right. The way to Tokmak is actually already open and it's within easy reach, while military rats are joking with standard blanks about Babkosel in the lowlands, which no one needs. I don't know what that means, but we'll see what they start writing when the crest reaches Tokmak. And there is only one clue to everything: the lack of reserves, which the Tuvans, so that's Shoigu, degenerate, did not prepare, while Cascade, the 58th Army, Marines, and the rest heroically won time for this. Live with it now. A bit confusing. Google Translate obviously has its limitations, and also some of those references I just don't understand. But the point is that there's a Russian source saying they're breaking through, they're going to be on the way to Tokmak, and there are no reserves here because the Shoigu didn't sort out enough reserves. So that is, yeah, take that, of course, again with a pinch of salt. But uh, it is a sign that all is not well behind the Russian lines. Okay. Now, Astra Intel again says Ukrainian infantry are storming enemy positions in Novopokrovka. So this is not Novopokrovka, but Novopokrovka, which is up here. There were claims that the Ukrainians have been having some success coming down this highway to the south, and that would cut off Novopokrovka. They've been trying to attack here for actually a good month or so, and the Ukrainians have lost quite a bit of equipment around that area. Anyway, the northern part of the settlement is now disputed, so that is really significant if true. It means that they are indeed, putting pressure right along this entire bridgehead, the edge of this bridgehead, and potentially, getting through some of the, literally breaking through the defense lines, which would be hugely significant. It's what we expected possibly today in the last 24 hours, but yeah, it could well have happened. And I'll keep an eye on how things develop today. Right. Okay, going on to military aid now. Into the fight. Ukraine's indigenously produced Vilka. So we have heard that Vilka missiles have been used previously. There are different, it was a Vilka that was possibly used to attack the Kerch Bridge. When there were all these theories about what hit the Kerch Bridge, turns out it was a lorry full of explosives by, it seems, but Vilkas have been claimed to be used in a number of places. These are surface-to-surface missiles. Chuck Farrer claims it's made its debut. GPS and inertial guidance give it maximum effective range of greater than 150 kilometers, 90 miles. So that is, a lot more than HIMARS, and a circular error probable of 10 meters. So that's a pretty accurate missile. We'll see if these are going to make a difference. And I've talked over the last week about how important it is for Ukraine to have an indigenous manufacturing capacity for a whole wide range of things. Drones, obviously, missiles. So we see Neptune missiles here, possibly the Vilka missile as well, and also self-propelled artillery like the Bogdana, and also tanks like the T-72 variant the Oblot, I think it is. So it's really important that they are making stuff so that they're not completely dependent on aid for their military equipment. Okay, more on military aid. So this is Zelensky himself saying more decisions will be made to strengthen our warriors next week. This is kind of cryptic. I'll be very interested to see what he's referring to. The military command is in charge of developing infrastructure for new Ukrainian jets. So Reznikov today said the jets F-16s should be operational by spring next year. Obviously, that's what months are we talking about? Well, that's all the way up to May. So it could be rather late and into summer, but it could also be sort of, hey, March So, yeah, diplomats engaging more actively with partners to get what our warriors need. The needs are specific, so should the results be. So, it'd be interesting to see what he's referring to, whether that means there are some things that will be announced this week or whether that's just kind of rhetoric. And we've seen already today that these Australian cardboard drones have been really effective. Russian former pilot and now a blogger writes that yesterday Ukraine attacked the airfield of the Russian Federation for the first time, presumably in Kursk, using disposable PPDS cardboard drones from the Australian company Sypac. Depending on the model, these drones can lift up to 3 to 5 kilograms. The plane is, or 3 or 5 kilograms. The plane is capable of carrying cargo for 1 to 3 hours, depending on the load, at the distance of 40 to 120 kilometers. So there are a few variables there, but these are useful. They can't be detected as easily because they're made out of disposable components that aren't sort of metal and whatnot, predominantly, and that means that they can get by air defense systems and hopefully cause considerable damage to the Russians. Now, there's been talk. There's a bit of analysis yesterday, I think it was, saying that the Ukrainians do have an advantage, and they need to exploit that advantage in terms of scale and tech with drones. So they're getting help from a lot of people around the world. Russia less so, and that means that they do have an advantage with, for example, drones like this. So the Russians don't have this capability of drone. I mean, it sounds simple, but it's simple is effective here and cheap. So you can get through air defense detection and cause a lot of damage. So if they can really take advantage of that asymmetry while they can, then that'll have a lot of effect. So the Ukrainians really need to drive home that advantage while they have it. Romania is waiting for the signing of documents to start the training of Ukrainian pilots. Quote, I expect the signing of the protocols for the pilots in the next few days, which is the last hurdle. As far as we can tell, the logistics have already been arranged, said the Prime Minister of Romania. Fantastic stuff. Yeah, just a case of signing a bit of paper, and it's good that all the other bits and pieces have been put in place already. Now, the US plans to supply Ukraine with cluster munitions for rocket artillery, according to the Washington Post. No, that's not true. So these claims concerning the M26. So rocket cluster munitions. The Ukrainians have the use of DPICM. So these are artillery shells that can send out a bunch of submunitions. A lot of people are calling for M26 that can send out bigger and more submunitions via a rocket, and they are the next thing to be given. And lots of people are clamoring for the US to release these. Here we have Max 23 reporting that the Washington Post has said they are. That's not true as far as I can work out, which is why we need to sometimes be careful about these kind of claims. I think it's a misquote from an opinion piece where they're talking about it, but they haven't been promised. So just, we need to be careful. Russia plans to produce 118 rockets in August, says a representative of the GUR. These are missiles of the Kinjal and Caliber type, Iskander, KH-101 and 22. At the same time, Russia still has at least 585 missiles with a range of more than 500 kilometers. The question is, as I keep saying, the Russians are running out, and I think they're probably just in the same position now as they have been for months, which is they are using these missiles at the rate that they can produce them. If they can produce 118 in a month, that means you'll see them fire about 118. Otherwise, they're really going to be dipping into their strategic reserves, which means that they won't have rockets to use, missiles to use in the event of any further military confrontation. So if they suddenly got into a war with NATO, they'd have nothing left in the tank. NATO, my opinion is, if they really got into a war with NATO, NATO would extinguish the Russian armed capabilities within days. I really do. It's like Russians have exhausted themselves in this pointless war, and they've made themselves incredibly weak. Yes, they still have a navy and something of an air force, but I'm not even sure, even though they've got a lot of airframes, how many pilots they've got compared to what the entirety of NATO could bring to bear. So, if you did get to this horrible situation where NATO were against Russia in some kind of third world war, Russia would be extinguished pretty quickly. The question is what would happen with China. But yeah, so they're using up these missiles, and they've used them on fairly pointless targets over the course of the year. A lot of civilian infrastructure rather than military infrastructure, and they're now left with only being able to produce an amount that is not doesn't correlate with their needs and intentions. So yeah. Okay, moving on to geopolitical stuff. This weekend, pro-Russian saboteurs halted more than 20 Polish trains, possibly to hamper Ukraine's war effort. It's been figured out that they used a radio stop command that anyone can broadcast at a certain frequency with as little as $30 of equipment. That's a piece in Wired talking about how a cheap radio hack has hampered, I guess, support to Ukraine via the Polish rail network. Interesting. The second ship, the Primus bulk carrier that has been stuck in Odessa for 18 months, has now safely reached territorial seas in Romania. I don't see why this. It's incredible that this is big news. That we're allowing Russia to blockade international ships from carrying grain around the world. It's disgusting. This annoys the bejesus out of me. And why only the second ship has been able to hug the coast so far, I don't know. I'd be like making sure all those ships are, because you almost want to, I don't know, entrap Russia. There's potentially, like, you want to be trying to goad Russia into doing something stupid that then gets everyone to absolutely pile in on Russia. I'm not saying we want a third world war, but you want Russia to do something stupid so that sanctions can then be absolutely hammered against them, or really serious ramifications there. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. So just to return briefly to Ramaswamy, he's now seen as a Russian asset. Russian state TV host Yevgeny Popov, and he's not the only one, has said his show on Friday that they're hoping that Ramaswamy is a Republican nominee if their favorite candidate, Trump, won't make it. So we know that Russian propagandists really like Trump because of his position on Ukraine, right? And Ramaswamy has quickly become their second favorite, and they are fawning over him in the Russian media, which should tell you something. Which should tell you, if Ukraine's important to you, then Ramaswamy is not the guy to support. Quote, "We should take a closer look at this, Mr. Ramaswamy. The last time we had installed President Trump for the Americans, why not try again?" I mean, this is their claim that they were involved in the election of Donald Trump. Whether you believe that or not, whatever. I would say there was interference. I'm not talking about collusion. That's a different question. I'm talking about whether the Russians were interfering, and we know they were. I mean, the social media companies have admitted it, and all the reports have admitted it. Why not try again? Let's give it another try and see how Ramaswamy will perform in case Trump doesn't manage to win the post of the president. So that is them kind of talking that up. Now, there'll be a lot of kind of psyops involved in that, a lot of bluster. But, it's something to worry about, I would say. Now, Randy Mott, who is a Republican activist himself, like a Republican activist, saying here that it has accelerated and it was inevitable. Trump's polling numbers are sliding. The initial polls are mostly name recognition. As voters start paying attention, it matters less and less. This is interesting, so bear with me here. The second and third place right now are DeSantis and Haley, although Ramaswamy as well is kicking about. The choice for support of Ukraine is Haley. And actually, her response on that issue in the Republican nominee debate may have been one of the high points getting her into the race for real. About 57% of GOP, so if you're a Republican and you're watching this, you're going to be kind of one of these probably. About 57% of GOP and probably 60 to 70% of GOP likely voters support aid to Ukraine. I had been writing for months that DeSantis made a mistake going for Trump votes and being tepid on Ukraine aid. He actually sort of calmed down his Ukraine claims because he was kind of anti-Ukraine aid and then got called out a bit on it and then publicly warmed to the idea. But he was basically trying to be Trump part two, right? Trump number two. And so therefore he's just basically emulating all of what Trump's talking points were. But when you've got someone like Haley who's able to very clearly differentiate, then you have within the Republican broad church, well, it's not that broad, but within the Republican church, you have the ability to say, actually, if I don't want exactly what this candidate is going for, then actually there's another candidate that is clearly differentiatable. Anyway, so yeah, I've been writing for months that DeSantis made a mistake going for Trump votes and being tepid on Ukraine aid. He listened to the Compromise Heritage Foundation, ignoring his previous position. Right, just a little bit on the Heritage Foundation. So this is this lobbying group that I talked about the other day. He wrote a really bad piece that was just wrong on giving money to Ukraine is taking money away from Maui wildfire victims. Now, Randy Mott, again here as a Republican activist, takes a really big pop at the Heritage Foundation, which is someone that foundation that he should otherwise really be in support of because it kind of aligns with a lot of Republican ideals. But he takes a look at its history, and this is a really good thread, and I'll probably dip into it in an extra. But I was really interested in these pictures. This is aside from the topic, but look at these pictures. This is from the Second World War. Arm Britain and prolong the war. In other words, don't arm Britain. Lend lease, lose lives. So this is there was movement in America at the time that's really similar to the anti-Ukraine aid movement, which is the anti-UK aid movement. Why not peace with Hitler? And this one's absolutely fascinating. Hitler has not attacked us. Why attack Hitler? This is so similar to the same sort of people saying stuff about Putin now. You know, stay out the European war. How often have you seen that as a talking point? The US got involved in World War II because it was absolutely strategically in their interest to do so. Anyway, I just thought that was a really interesting bunch of pictures. So Randy Mott does an analysis of the Heritage Foundation, which I think is really worth looking into, and how they are basically pro-Russian and then have been called out on it and then changed their views a little bit and so on and so forth. And yeah, really, really good analysis here. But what's also interesting is as I say, so much to talk about in this analysis. But the Heritage Foundation is a case of following the money. They get some money from the Danube Institute, which is a Hungarian organization, which then gets its money from the Batyányi Foundation, the Hungarian state, which is Orban and Russia. So the Heritage Foundation, you follow the money, it does go to Russia. So then when Randy Mott says this is fascinating as far as I'm concerned. I wrote articles on this the other year. When was it? When the CPAC, so the Conservative Conference, went and did their national conference in Hungary. You know, why did you go to Hungary to do a national conference? Because Hungary are in bed. You know, you've got Orban, which is an autocratic state, which is in bed with Russia. So why is basically the GOP conference going and doing it in Hungary? Now, Randy Mott here says Tucker Carlson, CPAC, and Heritage Foundation wanted to partner up with a new democratic Eastern European country devoted to conservative principles that was successful and very pro-American. They could have picked Poland. It's really interesting. So the Law and Justice Party in Poland, that would be a pretty good choice for the CPAC to support. You know, one of our strongest, if not strongest allies, you know, with regard to Ukraine. Instead, they picked Hungary, economically struggling and with a close relationship to Russia, the dark horse in Europe. Was that decision to go to Hungary and promote Viktor Orban based on the work of Tucker's father? Did Heritage decide to go seek the Hungarian Institute to team with, or did the idea come to them? I fear that my party, as in the Republicans, has been led down a rocky road that ends up going over a cliff. Time to change direction. So Randy Mott is not a big fan of this. And then it goes back to this. The reason that CPAC went there is because the big lobbying groups that support CPAC, like the Heritage Foundation in this case, are supported by Russian money through Hungary. It's just really good analysis. Anyway, you know, that's not so much news, that's more of an analysis extra, and it will probably rile some conservatives maybe, but it's worth knowing some of this stuff. You know, when you listen to Heritage Foundation going off about, well, money to Ukraine is money away from Maui victims, why are you saying that, Heritage Foundation? Who are you lobbying for here? Are you lobbying for American conservatives, or are you lobbying for Russian interests? Just worth putting out there. Right. Financial Times reports on Yandex founder, who I reported recently had been slagging off the war, right, and being very openly against the war. He's denounced it publicly, but now he's asking for the EU to lift sanctions on him. I find this interesting. What do you have to do? So imagine you are a Russian oligarch, but you've come out of Russia, right? And you've been sanctioned because your money is embroiled within, you know, the Russian state and supporting the war. You've come out of Russia now and you're denouncing the war. At what point? What are the criteria that you have to achieve to get sanctions lifted on you? So he's publicly denounced the war and he's saying all the right things. Is he still doing enough business with Russia to mean that sanctions won't be lifted? Is there a point where sanctions can be lifted? Is there a protocol? Is there something like actually formally written down whereby there are criteria that trigger sanctions? and by removing yourself from those criteria that you would trigger not getting sanctioned? Or is it kind of like, yeah, he's a bit dodgy, that guy, let's sanction him, but there's no like very organized and definite criteria? I don't know. It's just an open question. So Arkady Volozh here, tech billionaire and co-founder of Yandex, made a formal request to the EU to lift its sanctions against him. The FT reported on August 26th. Now, Yandex is interesting. So Yandex is your Google equivalent, your Russian Google. And it has, like Google has on all of us, it has a ton of data on Russian individuals. Now, there are claims that Yandex data is going to be used or is being used by the Russian state in order to get mobilization. So it knows who people are and where they are and what they believe, kind of. Just go back to Facebook data and Cambridge Analytics and all that. Facebook knows our desires and intentions, know us better after 300 likes than our own partner does, which is absolutely incredible. Anyway, so the idea here is that Yandex has all this knowledge on the Russian population, and that's usable for the Russian state to get people that they want to get, to try and really hone in, focus on particular types of people to get them mobilized, maybe as almost a punishment. People who are anti, you can find out from their internet activity that they might be slightly anti-Putin. It's like, yep, we'll have them in the army, send them to the front. I don't know, but anyway, if Yandex, and that's not to blame Yandex are now essentially victims to the Russian state. There's not a lot they can do about that. But how much is he involved still with Yandex? I don't know. All these questions would need to be answered there. Anyway, just to move on to the final piece here. This is from Medusa, apparently, this is an exiled Russian media organization, says Putin's administration chose opponents for the Russian dictator in the 2024 presidential election. They decided not to register candidates under the age of 50 so that Putin does not look old against their background. This is the idea that, and who was it that was saying it the other day? I think it might be someone on Ukraine the Latest podcast, saying that there's enough democracy in Russia to make it look like they've got a sort of democracy, but everyone knows it's not democracy, right? It's not a democracy. And there's this idea that they'll choose people to be in the election against Putin, but actually those people are really strategically chosen, and it's just a big facade, effectively. Anyway, there you go. We have visitors now. I do have to go. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share, all that kind of stuff. Really appreciate your support. And Toodle Pips, I may get to speak to you later, but I may not.